Hi everyone, welcome to this podcast. So, hi Mahesh. We have Navedya with us, who will be co-hosting here with us.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here. And thanks so much for taking the late night schedule. Thanks to my 3-year-old son. So he just went to sleep. So now I can do this.
We are also glad to have you here. So I think we can all do a quick round of intro. Hi everyone, I'm Nevedya. I'm one of the mentors at Hello PM. Some of you might have already spoken to me as well on different platforms, or might have read my post as well. Uh, so I have been in product for close to 8 years now. Started as a consultant and then moved to product roles at different companies. And right now I'm engaged with Walmart. I work in one of the sections of Walmart called Sam's Club. Yeah, there's all about me.
Hey everyone. So I started my career as a web application engineer and then did my MBA. And then during my program, I started up a company and then joined a startup in Bangalore called Nolscape. And then the last 7 years or so, I've been with Sam's Club, and Naivedya and I are colleagues. So within Sam's, I started off in the supply chain team. I moved to the replenishment team, then moved to digital with apps, and then came back to supply chain. So yeah, it's been about 15 or 16 years in product management, and happy to talk about my experience.
How is it going right now? Presently, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an exciting space. I mean, not just as a as a product manager or a product leader to be in, but also to be in retail with the not just the context changing, the context with technology such as ChatGPT and all the other things that are coming up. I don't know if how many minutes in we've already started talking about ChatGPT, but that's kind of what the reality is. Every year, every quarter, when we build out roadmaps and we reevaluate some of our goals, it's just exciting to see how the context is changing, but also the core of retail and how we deliver delight to our members. We call our customers as members. Sam's Club is a membership model. So just being able to do that from a supply chain standpoint, and also on the what I mentioned about the core of retail, how associates, how our employees have also leveraged technology in the last 3 years has been something very exciting to watch. So again, the industry is very different to the one in India. In the US, it's a lot more finesse. We need to. There's a lot more influencing that needs to happen, and also we're based out of Bangalore, so there's that challenge that comes in as well. But all of that just makes the role interesting. So yeah, just looking forward to what the next year or 2 years will actually look like.
When did you make the call to move to product, right? I'm sure you didn't make it like, you, at that point, nobody actually woke up saying that, hey, I want to be a product manager someday. But
Correct.
what was that inflection point for you?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. I think two stories come to mind. So my personal journey into product management. So I think as a cliche thing. I mean, I'm an accidental product manager. I didn't plan to. I didn't like in school or something like I want to be a product manager. But when I was a web application engineer at this property marketplace in Singapore, so I actually developed like an analytics tool that helped property agents assess various insights for the property that they were selling. So they could look just from the address, they could look at what is the current the listing price, what are the nearby, is there a metro station nearby, what is the appreciation going to be for that property 5, 10, 15 years from then, and so on and so forth. And they would use that and essentially sell that property or unit to a prospective buyer. So one of the things I realized, after launching the product, and I held the first check. I still remember that moment. It was about 290 Singapore dollars for getting a year-long license into that product. So that's when I realized, like, why is it that we've not charged $100 or $1,000? Like, why is it 290? What is the mechanics behind it? So that kind of led me to a lot more questions, a lot more curiosity built up. and then eventually started pursuing MBA. And long story short, when I graduated and then when I was looking for a role, is when I saw one of the top finance organizations have a role called product manager, and that's my first sight of seeing that role called product manager. And when I read the description, it was everything that I wanted to do after MBA. So there was a bit of technology involved, there was a bit of business involved, there was a bit of pricing, there's all of these things that that check, and that story that I was telling, that I got reminded of right after that. And then I met my role model, my idol. He was my previous company's CEO, and he was also a prof at that B school. So that's when I met with him, and we started speaking about product management. And right after I graduated, I then flew back and joined his startup in Bangalore. So that's kind of my journey into product management. I didn't really plan for it, but that's how I entered into it. But the second story I want to say is, so I did interact during the last few years. I did interact with the product manager from Palm. So Palm was this one of the early adopters of smartphones, and he was a product manager for the very first operating system that they built. He built calculator and calendar as well. And he was talking to me about how product management was in the late 90s. So I don't know when product management as a term was coined, but there were definitely roles that kind of emulated what we do as product management, like from the late 90s. And I've seen it evolve quite a lot. But that's where my journey started, and sort of how we're in product in Walmart right now.
For anybody who is aspiring for a product role or who is thinking about it, right? So 3 qualities or 3-4 traits which you deem important for being a product manager.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, and something that I look for in when I'm interviewing or exploring opportunities with a candidate. Yeah, 3-4. So let's start with the first one. I think one is the ability to connect dots, right? So what do I mean by that? So essentially, it comes down to how creative you are, right? So for me, creativity is not. I mean, there's a lot of theory, and there's a lot of huge number of TED Talks about it, and it's a very interesting, very close to me kind of a topic. Essentially, if you think about how you become innovative, or how you be creative, or any of along those lines, it's about how you take the problem that you're trying to solve, see in your mind, or what you're reading, or the knowledge areas that you're exposed to, and see how you can connect the dots, right? So let's say, like when you ask a kid, like, explain a complex topic, they explain it first with how you are able to relate to, and then kind of go into what that topic or the complex topic is all about, right? So that's what I mean by connecting the dots. So how can you actually take like, if you've got a really tough problem to solve, how do you do that in a very in a way that has already been done before, that's probably going to push the boundary of what's already existing, but also in terms of connecting with things that you're already aware of, and kind of applying that to real world life. So that's the first thing, in a very simple way, creativity. The second one is able to explain something in a very simple way. So let's take ChatGPT. How do you explain that in a really simple way? Or your own experience, your own past experience, how do you explain that in a simple way? The last one is the ability to influence when you don't have the authority, right? So you don't actually have people reporting to you, right? So when you say led a team of engineers, they don't actually report to you, right? So why should they listen to you? So starting off with why, starting off explaining how it makes their job more interesting, and then how it connects back to your users, in our case, members, and how we delight them. What are the different ways that we can do that? Those are very, I think I would say, the top 3. There are a lot more, but those are top 3 that I would say would be top 3 skills that an aspiring PM, if they're already doing that in their current roles, definitely PM is a great career opportunity in that sense.
Got it. So creativity, storytelling, and influence without authority. Those
That's
are
right.
the three things.
Yeah,
Interestingly, none of them actually you talked about any of the hard skills, right? Like, for example, knowing certain domain, knowing certain space, knowing certain technology, but more of like uh, general things that essentially kind of enable you to kind of build products, right? So interesting, quite interesting, and to
No,
hear from
actually,
you
on
that.
that point, right? Like, so you'll just look at my my trajectory as well. So I started off with a property marketplace. I went into corporate training with gamification, and then I'm now in retail and in supply chain. what 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 is the connection among all these three, right? In terms of hard domain or any of that, right? Essentially, I think the domain part might maybe get you a foot in the door, might get you an interview, any of those. But as a product manager, you really need to be a generalist, right? That's what I feel like. You don't have to be a technologist in this case. Now, why is the technology part important here? Like, you shouldn't be completely ignorant of that. The reason is you've got to think from the engineer's point of view.
So what were the things that really helped out from your past experiences? Because here, since you already suggested, the domain was not same. It was different. So what really made the difference in your case?
Quite a few things. Maybe I'll try to keep it short, but I think one aspect is um, just the curiosity to learn. Like, I think it comes down to that. Like, um, when I saw Google Maps for the first time, my first question was, why is it free? Like, how can you give such a complex app for free? Like, it just blew my mind. Of course, my first exposure to Google was Google search, and there also had the same question, like, how can this be free? Like, when you have a product or a service, there's got to be a fee or a charge. If you're working on a problem, just don't think of solving that problem. Like, become an expert in the domain, or at least try to be, right? So all of that knowledge went into the product, and very key insight into that was we launched the product with two languages as MVP. Now, you could debate, is that the right thing to do and all of that? We launched in Mandarin and English because then the agents would be able to convince Mandarin or Chinese buyers in the US, in Singapore, to actually buy with that report that we gave out. Going back to the first check that I mentioned. So those are the things. Like, if I didn't know that and we came up with a version that was only English, it would have clearly alienated a big portion of buyers, maybe even agents, right?
Uh, Product management at a startup versus product management at Fortune 1, right? What's the difference in terms of roles and responsibility?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, I think so product management at a startup versus a Fortune 1 company. I think the core part of problem solving remains the same. So how you solve the problem, and the different sets of stakeholders that you need to convince or influence, and all of that is what I think goes up drastically in a Fortune 1 company, right? So when it comes to a startup, you're doing a lot more than product management. Like I was saying, I was a trainer. I used to go to these sessions. We used to organize them. We used to make sure it goes on time. So you were a lot of different roles. You were not just just a product manager. So and that comes kind of with a startup role itself. It's not just that, okay, you're a product manager at a startup and hence you have to do this.
Since you have been on the other side, right? So what is the very first or the very first and second thing that you notice in a person who is giving interview to you?
I think the I don't know if it's the first thing that I look for, but definitely up there among the things I look for is the ability to think big, right? So given any problem, how can you actually think big with it, right? So it's very crucial. And when I say think big, I don't mean like okay, like let's take a retail problem and then see how many users will adopt that problem. That's not the point of thinking big. The where I'm, in terms of the roadmap itself, how can you actually have this foresight into certain things that is likely to come up in the future, right? And kind of thinking of not just that one problem, but how does it help you solve maybe a much bigger problem, right? Like, let's take an example. Let's say design an alarm clock for a certain customer segment, right? There could be different ways of looking at it. It could be for kids getting ready to go to school. Just maybe, that as a question itself can have so many different connotations. But then when you think about features that, let's say, the top 1% or top 10% of PMs think about, it's not just features, right? It's the problem that they're trying to solve. And to me, in that space, if you're just not narrowed into thinking exactly what the kids will want, but then thinking about, potentially what is it that kids are going to do when you give them an alarm clock? They're just going to hit snooze, go back to sleep. Like, we've all done that, right? But if you're able to think of different ways that actually help that specific segment, and again, I'm being very broad with kids, right? Now, this could be someone who's 16 to 19 years old, and so on. They don't even have a smartphone, right? So those are, I think, like, if you think about it from that problem standpoint, you could actually think, oh, what if I ask them to take a selfie before they can hit snooze, something like that, to that effect, where they're doing something on their day to day, and you're asking them to take a photo, otherwise the alarm was not shut off. I'm just giving an example on the spot, but that's what I'm trying to think. Like, if you're going into the level of the demographics, you're going to the thinking about what they're going to do, and then essentially looking at how you're essentially solving the biggest problem that's there with alarm clocks, and that's the example that's given. So that's thinking big. The second one is, I look for something different. What I mean by this is, I look for one of the key things I ask them is, what's been the toughest challenge that they've faced, and how have they overcome that, right? So this is, again, going back to a couple of stories I've heard in the past, and something about the Australian Army, and how they build a core team. I think Harsha Bogle mentioned this as well. They don't look for people who've had incredible highs in winning, but they look for how low have you actually gone? What is the toughest challenge you've faced? And so, and it's so relatable, right? Now, what is tough for me may not be tough for you, or the community as a whole, but objectively, if there is something that you've gone through and you feel like it's been your toughest experience, I want to see how you've come out of that, how that candidate has come out of that, with it could be with other people's help. Absolutely welcome to do that, but just the fact that they are ready to ask, they're ready to take that initiative and just come out of that, versus a challenge which is not really tough enough in a very objective way, and you're coming out of it. You need to take the subjectivity out of it in many ways, but just that, like, looking at that, and what is that toughest professional challenge is kind of the second thing that I look for. So these are the two things. I mean, obviously, they say, right, like skill can be taught, attitude cannot. So that's kind of what I look for. Say you've been working for a company. Let's say, assume you've not been laid off, and let's assume all of that, right?
Yeah.
So explain what you do to a 10-year-old.
Okay.
That's the first thing, right?
Okay.
I think I briefly saw that you were probably a stand-up comedian. Like, how do you explain stand-up comedy to a 10-year-old? That's the first one. Second one is, so again, I think going back to the professional challenge, right? Like, what's been your your lowest of lows in terms of your professional career? What has that been like, and how have you overcome that? So there's no right answer, but then what has been your approach
Towards. So, and if I would say, what would be the intention behind asking these two questions? Like, what was it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, like I was saying, I think what differentiates a great PM, good PM, and so on is, again, a lot of people think that product management, is a generalist role, so therefore you don't need to learn, or you anybody can do it. That's a misconception out there. So I think the ability to simplify is not simple. Second one about professional challenge is just the grit and the perseverance to succeed. We don't want product managers to just give up easily, right? When you're faced with a problem, that's where the creativity aspect comes in.
One is the influential aspects that you talk about, right? How to influence people. Okay, so since you have mentioned it and you have been doing it for a good time, right? So people could take it a direct question, but if suppose I have an idea about some feature, okay, so idea A, and if you have an idea about some feature and idea B, okay, so what would your approach would be to convince me to probably, test out B as well? Like how you will take that path? Like how will you will maybe try to influence, or how you would want it someone to take the step ahead?
No, I think there's an easy way, and I'll make your question a little bit harder as well. So let me
Okay.
answer the way that you've asked the question, and then I'll make it a little harder, right?
Okay, sure.
The way that you've asked is, okay, let's say there are two initiatives or two features,
Yeah.
and how would you either prioritize between the two, or how do you influence somebody to work on one versus the other,
Yeah.
or work on both, right? So I think it comes down to, I think from a simpler standpoint, it's just numbers, right? So you just talk about metrics, you talk about the company's goal, you talk about what metrics these two features have, meaning what is it that they're expected to deliver, how well grounded in data, and how confident are you as a PM in that data, and then you sort of just use that and you prioritize. Now, it's definitely much more tougher than the way I'm making it sound, but once you kind of have that kind of framework, you keep thinking about the different things that this is going to solve. Somebody doesn't even want to evaluate idea B, even if you have the numbers and the numbers say
Okay.
otherwise, right? Like, clearly idea B wins over idea A, right? So I think one of the things I've realized is, again, going back to corporate training and the gamification space, we actually built a simulation for influencing when you don't have authority, and that was, again, it was already there. That my boss had actually built that. My previous manager, he the elements of that simulation is kind of what I've actually imbibed and I've actually carried on as well. So what happens in that is that you actually are introducing a new idea into a company, and there is a person there who is he's a really tough nut to crack. He's a really tough person to actually influence. So how do you then go about doing that? And whatever you do, you talk about the benefits, you talk about numbers, you talk about metrics. Ultimately, what you will eventually find out is that person's job is on the line. So obviously, that person is going to support what you're introducing as a new idea. So unless you know that, and you make sure that that person is secure, doesn't feel anxious about his job, you won't be able to convince that person. And without that person's conviction, the board in that game, the board of directors, will not actually allow you to move forward with your idea. So you won't understand, you won't find out any of this until you're well into the game and you find out that this is what actually works. And you can't convince him directly. He won't even give you a meeting. You have to go to someone he knows or she knows, and so on. So there's multiple layers into it. It's very similar. It's not so simplistic, but it's very similar to the role we do as well. So in the case of idea B, just coming back to this idea B, so in this case, right, like if I were to just quickly summarize, if let's say there's someone who's not willing to go with idea B, there's got to be a reason for it. Like, one of the things I've realized is that when you're talking to business counterparts or engineers or non-product managers, let's say, the thing that they miss out is being in the driver's seat. So they want to drive those decisions or those requirements, but they want to drive it through you. So if you take up that and you just start dictating this is what the product is going to look like, they're going to be like, hey, like what, like this is not what I wanted. But in the back of the minds, it solves the problem that they want, but it's not something that they drove. So making them partners in your process has really been, to me, the biggest driver for influencing someone.
So 3 emerging trends in product space.
So I would say all of them. I mean, they're central around retail in my world, at least. But there's definitely AI, there's virtual reality, and the one that I'm most excited about is augmented reality. Now, in the why product space specifically, and of course, there are different applications of this. I think the applications is what excites me about all of these three. Whether it's retail, whether it's non-retail, I think we're all aware of AI, but what excites me about AR is just bringing those two worlds together. So the whole notion of metaverse was that, but I think with AR coming in, it's going to be a lot more immersive, and that's the whole promise of what an iPhone originally was. So I think AR is going to be pretty big in the next 5 to 10 years, as long as they can crack the privacy concern part.
Okay. So next set of questions I'll ask are based around frameworks, right? So I'll ask you around different scenarios and which framework you prefer.
Okay.
Right. Right. So first, prioritization.
So importance versus urgency.
Okay. So Eisenhower. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Design.
I don't know if it's, I mean, I don't think it's design, but just the design thinking aspect is, the empathy model, the empathy map, just that, I think, factoring that into design, I would say it would be the framework that I would use. Yeah.
Product discovery.
Obviously, I don't think it's a widely published framework, but what I'd like to do is firstly talk about the why. So when you talk about product discovery, I'm assuming like a framework to kind of cover discovery end to end. So talk about the why, talk about metrics, talk about success of those metrics. What does success look like for that particular product? What is the product market fit going to be when it happens? Who are the customers? What are their needs? What is their pain points?
3 sources that you read or watch to keep yourself updated.
Yeah. So apart from books, I think one book I cannot recommend enough is Cracking the PM Interview. So now I don't know if others have also recommended the same book. For me, it's not just about the book explaining what the interview process looks like, but just explaining what product management looks like. Apart from that, 2 podcasts that I want to recommend. One is the Happiness Lab, and the other one is Freakonomics Radio, and lastly, TED Talks.
2 important skills that are needed at junior, senior, and executive level product management.
Let me talk about one thing that's maybe that cuts across. I don't think I want to say. I mean, you're just doing it at different levels, right? Like, if you're an entry level PM, shouldn't you be thinking strategic? Absolutely, yes, you have to, right? But would you be thinking more strategic if you're as more senior PM? Absolutely. So it's just at different levels at which you're performing. So I would say a simple answer to that is if you are able to think big and you're able to articulate it in a very simple way, and you're also a very articulate problem solver, right?
What's the importance of storytelling for product managers?
It's our lifeblood. It's you've got to be a great storyteller. I mean, there's a reason why Jira calls it a story, right? So you've got to be able to tell stories and influence, like I said before.
Okay. And how can we go about improving our storytelling skills as PMs?
So one is listen to more stories, but also tell more stories. So if you've got a nephew, niece, a young kid in your house or nearby, go tell them stories, and you will start noticing how positively they react when you're telling a good story, good, well-structured story, versus one that just drags on and on.
As a product manager, what are the couple of things now you would do differently what you would have done at an initial level?
As is the case with any role, I would have found a mentor very early on for a product manager. I think for the first few months or maybe the first year or so, I did not have a solid mentor. But once I had that person in my life, my journey in product management took off.
Okay. Then, what was the most hardest question of your life while getting interviewed as a PM you faced?
Design a communication solution for astronauts going to Mars.
Okay, okay. So definitely the next question arises, what was your approach to solve it?
Yeah, so I didn't even think this was not like prepared. Like it was, that was like to me. The reason why I think about it that is like you always think about frameworks. We
Yeah.
right? Uh, oh, you want a short answer? Okay, let me quickly
Yeah,
think and then I'll come back. Okay,
yeah.
okay, yeah, I'm ready. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. So you want to repeat the question or should I just answer?
Yeah, you can directly.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think the way I answered was, I have a framework. So framework is okay. Who are the users? What problems? We spoke about product discovery. That's kind of what I usually do or solve any design questions. But this one was a curveball where you didn't really think, oh, who the users are were astronauts. They're fighting for if there's a emergency situation, that's immediately what you think of. And my approach was thinking about the technology side of things, whether there's 5G there, whether there's a Wi-Fi dongle there, and all those kind of things. But really the question was, how do you design a solution for them, right? And so if I were to do that differently, I would be first thinking about the different use cases. What would they how would they be able to communicate with a device that's probably should be just on your wrist, so on and so forth. And then sort of just go from there to solving what problems they might face when they're there. And then the differentiator should have been, in hindsight, talk about how can that be commercialized in the future when NASA is developing this. So I was supposed to be the product manager for NASA designing this communication solution.
Very common interview question that you have faced every time, and now you ask everyone.
I think explain what you do to a 10-year-old.
Okay, simply. Okay, yeah, we already covered it. So, yeah. What are the set of questions that you will be looking forward to ask a person who is switching their career coming from a non-product background and they're
Why,
transitioning into product role? Yeah.
why product management? And there's a reason for this, right? So it's not like it's a very simple question,
Yeah.
right? But one of the things I've found is they're not able to answer that with conviction. It's just that, okay, they've seen a product manager and they just want to get into that role, right? Like they've seen someone who's successful or they've read about it and they just want to get in, right? So all the things we spoke about, those need to be there. And then just that different way of looking at things from from the other roles in the company needs to be there, or needs to be at least something that they can demonstrate.
What are the best practices that one could do to have your attention towards their resume, or the 3 to 4 things that makes you compelling resume?
Oddly, I'm let's talk. Okay, so 3 things. One is you've got to have numbers. You've got to show impact, because as a product manager, that's what you're doing day in and day out. So if you don't show impact, if you're describing writing stories as one of the achievements in your previous role, you won't get my attention. The second one is, let me talk about what I don't look at. I don't look at grades. I don't like that's to me maybe third or fourth thing. Maybe it doesn't matter really. But I think the third one is very important to me is hobbies. So the hobbies that you have, tell me what you like, what you do, and I spend some time during the interview also exploring some of your hobbies as well. Just as a conversation, right?
Um, how a person switching from a different space, maybe sales or marketing, is coming to product management role, how these people or how people can approach towards getting the first PM job.
Yeah, it's not that easy. I'll be very frank. I think once you've it depends on what level or your career you are at, right? And So if you're relatively on the younger side and you have less experience and so on, maybe it's a little bit easier to make that switch at that point in time. But yeah, I mean, just the resources that you're putting out as part of Hello PM, and also the other resources that I mentioned as well. So as long as you have the awareness to most of these resources, and you've got some basic business understanding, whether you're a salesperson or an engineer, and you want to transition, I mean, definitely will have a chance of an interview or maybe an exploratory round. And then that's where you show your skills as a PM, but just that you didn't have that formal title as a PM. So usually I don't filter resumes just because they don't have the product management as a background. But if you don't demonstrate some of these things that I mentioned in your resume, then obviously those would be grounds for exclusion from your interview process.
Awesome, awesome. So I guess we have covered all the aspects of getting into the PM role. If you were to start your PM journey today from zero, from scratch, what you'll be doing right now from today?
Listen to you guys. No, no, I think some of these learning resources that we have today, like didn't exist. Like Cracking the PM interview book was probably published about 10 years back. So there was no roadmap, no pun intended, to actually becoming a product manager. But I think so if I were to do it differently, and if this is when I'm starting out as a new role, I think a couple of things. One is just put yourself out there, meaning write as many posts as possible. So on LinkedIn, it's been probably a year since I had that habit of doing that. So almost every day or alternate day, I used to post something about a product that I saw. It could be physical, it could be an app, it could be a lot of posts that went that actually caught a lot of people's attention was probably on Netflix and few other apps that a lot of people use, but also some other posts which I didn't expect that people would be able to connect to also spread quite a bit.
It was a whole masterclass in itself, right? A great learning experience. And so just to conclude this session, thank you so much, Maheshwar, for joining us, and thank you so much, Navid, for co-hosting with me. And it really brings so much of value to us.